So who was it that once said, the best camera you have is the one that is in your hand? I'm not sure who it was, but it was a famous photographer, maybe more than one. But if you're like most people on this planet, you have a camera in your hand almost all the time. So for the last 2 months, I have been traveling. Most of my photographs, in fact, almost all of them, have been with this camera here. And so I started realizing a couple of things. First of all, that I can take pretty good pictures with this camera. It does a very nice job under most circumstances. And then I also realized that there's a lot I can learn on this camera, that some features that I haven't taken advantage of, and that might help me to create better photographs with it. Maybe get a little more creative with it. So that's what I want to share with you today, and particularly if you are someone who uses a phone camera all the time, but you're also thinking about investing in a DSLR or mirrorless camera and the lenses that go with it, then you're the person I want to talk to, because I think that this camera, if used to the best of its ability, can expand your photography, it can improve your photography, and help you graduate to that point where you're ready to invest real money into photography. Okay, so first of all, the camera that I am using here is an iPhone 12. It came out 2 years ago, so that there are other versions like the 13, the 13 Pro, the 13 Pro Max, the 12 Pro, that have greater capabilities than this particular camera. Now, you might not be an iPhone user as well, so I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about here can translate to your camera phone as well. So without going into the limitations right now on this phone, I'll just say that what I do like about it, besides the simple use of it, is that it does have 2 lenses in the back. It has one in the front for those selfies, but the 2 in the back, one is an ultra wide and one is wide. And I think for wide angle shots, this camera really shines. One thing that I highly recommend you do is, when you start using your camera a little bit more than usual, is go into the camera settings. And when you go into camera settings, you're going to see a lot of different settings in the menu, and there's only a few of them in there that I think are relevant to how I use it anyway. One that I have turned on is grid, and when you use the grid, it's very useful for when you want to get a straight horizon line. It's useful for using that rule of thirds that can make a more compelling image. So having the grid line showing up when you shoot is a good thing, and you can choose to use it or not. The other thing about this particular camera is Smart HDR. HDR meaning high dynamic range. This camera really shines when it comes to HDR. I really like how it is able to handle the brights and the shadows, the contrasty scenes. Note that, when you are taking a photograph, you are using your touch screen to determine where to focus and also how the camera is going to expose. So wherever you touch on that screen, the camera is going to expose based on that area. So that's the HDR feature that really comes into play there. So in addition to the photo mode, there are 2 modes on here that I've learned to use quite a bit, and there's a lot to them that can really expand your camera phone photography and help you be a little more creative with your images. One of those is Pano. So now with Pano, remember back in the day, if you wanted to take multiple shots, pan across, you would have to download an app that would stitch those together for you. It was a little cumbersome, a little clunky. But now the camera does all that for you. And it also has some very nice features to help you get a good shot. So as you hold the camera up and you're ready to kind of compose an image, you know, line up your horizon line. It gives you a line, a horizontal line to do that. You'll see an arrow, and if you hit that, you can change the arrow direction. As soon as you hit the shutter button, the camera starts taking the image, and you can see that image unfold as you move across. And when you're ready to stop, you hit the shutter button. And so that's a really nice feature. You got to be careful with these because the wider you go, the more distortion you're going to get. It's a super ultra wide shot that you're getting. It can also do a vertical. So if you hold the camera horizontally, you can shoot up, or you can also start from the top and come down. So you do more of a vertical type shot. You can zoom in and zoom. Well, actually, you can't zoom in. You can zoom out to 0.5, which gives it a wider shot, but you can't zoom in. That's probably the only limitation that I can see with the Pano mode. Now, the other mode that I haven't really used a lot yet, but have started to more and more, is portrait. Now, portrait is a really interesting mode, and the best feature about it is it gives you a shallow depth of field. What do I mean by that? Remember, aperture affects depth of field. Depth of field is the sharpness throughout the image. So if you want everything behind, everything in the background, way off in the distance to be sharp, and you want the foreground to be sharp, then you want a great depth of field. If you want the background to be blurred out, then you want a shallow depth of field. Well, when you are in portrait mode, you get that shallow depth of field look. Now, this is a very interesting and very useful thing. First of all, if you like taking selfies, I think the portrait mode is the best way to do it. So let's see what that looks like. So when you go into portrait mode, you hold it up, you're going to see that it will tell you there's natural light, and it should be highlighted in yellow. But note that at the top there is an arrow. If you click on that arrow, it gives you a menu. You also actually don't have to click on that arrow. If you look at the top right corner, you'll see the letter F. Same thing as the F that shows up when you open up that menu. If you click on F, it's going to give you a scale. Well, what is F? F is aperture. When you take the aperture down to its lowest number, you are going to get the shallowest depth of field. So look at what happens here. When I take it down to f1.4, look at the background, how blurred it is. And then if I move it to a higher number, like all the way to f16, notice that everything comes into focus. So you can control that. You can control that look by adjusting the aperture on this camera in portrait mode. You can't do it in photo mode or Pano mode, but you can do it in portrait mode. Very cool. So the other feature in portrait, it has to do with lighting, and notice that there's some kind of crazy type of lighting that you can use with this mode. Now, a couple limitations with portrait mode. One is you can't zoom in or out. What you see is what you get. The other limitation here is that the subject that the camera recognizes has to be a certain distance from the camera or it won't work. So notice here that as I am pointing at the scene where it says natural light, it needs to have a yellow highlight around it to indicate that it is in portrait mode. If that is not highlighted, you're not going to get that shallow depth of field. You're not going to be able to control the aperture. Now, the biggest limitation of this camera for me right now is its zoom capability. It only goes to 5x, but I'll tell you, if I get beyond 2x, the images just don't look that good. You start losing that resolution. The newer cameras, the iPhone 13 Pro Max, for example, I mean, you can zoom in 10, 15 times. So the zoom capability of these cameras are getting better and better. So as I was putting my video together, I realized that I forgot something. Something I think is very important, and that is editing. Now I have downloaded 2 editing apps. One of them is Lightroom, and because I have a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, I was able to download that for free. If you don't have that subscription, and you're only using your phone right now, I don't recommend that you spend money on that yet. When you get your DSLR or mirrorless camera, you'll want to invest in that. But for now, there are other apps that are free or don't cost that much, and are pretty close to being as good as Lightroom. Now, in Lightroom, you can do, as I said, selective editing, and you can even mask out the sky and edit the sky and do a lot of other things that I think are very useful and very powerful when it comes to editing. So that to me is a very important process of photography, and I never realized that it would be in my phone photography, but it is. Now, the other program that I have downloaded is Snapseed, and it didn't cost me anything to download it. And it also has a lot of tools that allow you to do more selective type editing. Well, I hope you've learned a few things about your phone camera. At the very least, I hope that I have inspired you to use it more. The 2 modes that I have been enjoying greatly are, again, Pano and the portrait. So I think it would be best to just show you some photos I've been taking, because as I use that more and more, I find that I can use portrait or Pano in more ways than I thought possible. So, so let me give you those examples and enjoy the photos, and I'll see you next time.